Back to life. Another happy hour talk, Wine Simple. Also in German version right now available. I'm super excited to have a very, very special guest on today. Brian Nygaard. It should be super fun. I'm gonna have tons of questions. He's obviously not only interesting for wine. I chatted with him a couple times, and he's obviously an absolute authority within the cycling community, as he managed some mega cycling teams, and it's not a big secret that I'm a huge fan of his. Let's see if we can find him. Help? Okay, let me invite him. Let's see. Okay. Let's see, we have to get him on. Oh, hi, Mashid. Got some interesting cycling parts today. Okay, let me just send him another instruction. I know Instagram sometimes can lead a little bit. To that, eventually we'll get him on. So, this is the last Wine Simple talk for this week, but we'll get on to it. Let's see. We'll get him. Eventually, he will come on. Hi, Curious Wine Girl. Let's see. It's a little hot today. So for the first time, I'm having already white and red today. And we'll get him eventually. Hi, Katja. Let me text him again. Soon coming in. There he is.
Hello.
We just have to, we see you.
Sorry for the delay.
No worries. I know. We just see you horizontally. Perfect. Now we see you upright. Yes. Great pleasure to have you on the show.
I'll try and stay upright then.
Yeah. Unless you had too much wine already.
I cannot say that I have. How are you? Good to see you.
Likewise. So welcome to our show, Wine Simple Happy Hour Talk. I know for you, you are based right now in California. So
Yes.
It's a little earlier for you. The happy hour will start probably not that soon.
That's it. That's an advantage for me, I guess.
Yeah.
Starting the weekend early with you.
Yeah. So obviously you're such an authority within the cycling world. Not in the wine world yet. However, if someone looks at your social media, discovers very quickly that you're passionate about wine. But our paths crossed actually over a mutual friend, Joao, from Ingamba.
Yeah.
How do you know him?
He has the ability to show up in my life at the perfect moment and connect me with some of the people who actually turned out to be some of my best friends. So yeah, I feel lucky that as soon as I arrived here in California, he one of the first things he said to me, you have to meet Aldo. He's just you have so much in common, and I was like, yeah, perfect. And then I was only an hour from here, and then it turned out that you on the other side of America, you and I, we have so much in common. So I'm very honored to be here, and hopefully we can share some of those passions also with this audience.
Yeah. Well, I went over your social media because I obviously know and heard from you from the cycling world because you're such a figure in there. And
Thank you.
no, but when I read over your social media, I mean, if someone wouldn't know what you were doing in your previous life, you would think this is a wine person, clearly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess wine and cycling have been, competing for my attention for the last 25 years, and those are, until I had kids at least, those are the two things that I think about all the time and that I dream about at night. So I mean, I would actually have to say that at one point, even if I was, spent so much part of my professional life in cycling, that wine actually probably passed it at some point. I, could feel when you have two competing passions and one of them is actually taking the lead. I would have to say that probably happened to me a couple of times with wine, but they've always followed each other. Some of the best things that have happened in my life has happened through cycling, including ending up working in the wine industry now. So I have so much to be thankful for cycling. And if it wasn't for cycling and it wasn't for the people I met there, I wouldn't be here in California today, being the general manager of the winery. So yeah, I'm very thankful for that. And I guess that sometimes, even with riders and people like you, there is a common thing between cycling and wine. I'm not as sure I can put my finger on it, but there is definitely something.
Well, when I posted yesterday, I got this comment that I'm gonna read it because I thought, because I obviously said cycling and wine, and I've cycled with a fair amount of even wine-centric people. He said, wine and cycling both have been loci around with my life and has been resolved. As if I've learned anything, it's the best not to mix much wine with cycling.
Yeah. Yes and no. Yes, I mean if you're a professional athlete, you obviously can't drink as much wine as you and I do. But I think that the joy of being outside, being curious about nature, seeing all the seasons come and go, and I think also that you want to meet other people. There's something about if you've gone riding with someone, you actually a little bit friends afterwards. And the same way, I think if you enjoyed a glass of wine with someone, you are actually connected in a special way than if you would just have a normal conversation. And some of my best friends I made on bike rides, and even some of the people I didn't know before that I randomly met on bike rides are definitely my friends today. So I think they have a lot in common, that that curiosity and wanting to get involved and know and learn things about other people and about what surrounds us. I think cycling and wine have a lot more in common than the opposite.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, there's cycling, professional cycling, which if you're working with high performance, there's certain things you can't do. But I think the passion that we share for being outside, like I said, and for being curious and exploring and enjoying nature and seeing new places, that wine for me is totally that thing, And I would say now that I am fortunate enough to work in the industry, I've done 20 Tour de France's. I've probably done 35 Grand Tours all in all, working with high performance. And I really think that some of those things that make a good team, that make a great performance, are very similar. And at least I would like them to be similar where I am now to how you would run a Tour de France operation. That I'll give you one example that, when you work towards a goal, which could be winning the Tour, you try and get rid of everything that could stand in the way of the best possible performance, something that can really, make sure that you get the best expression of an athlete. And I think at least from the farming perspective, when the work that's done in the vineyards and everything that you can do for the soil and the winemaking to really shine at its best, I think a lot of that involves getting rid of things that stand in the way. We can't change nature. You have to be lucky also. I think also when you produce wine, you have to be very lucky sometimes. You have to make good decisions, but you also have to be lucky. And I think those are things that are very similar, with high performance and with working in this part of the world.
So how is it to manage in a Tour de France? And you manage teams, obviously.
When I look back on it, I probably think of it as less stressful as it was in the moment. You protect the athletes to in a certain way to avoid them being stressed and to avoid them being able to, lose their focus, which is so important. If you lose your focus for a short amount of time in a Grand Tour, it could be the difference of winning and not even being part of it at the end. But I think I look at all of it now, looking back, as an adventure. But when I was in the middle of it, even in my position, sometimes I would manage the team, and other parts I would work with very closely with athletes for strategic communication. It's a very stressful environment. And like I said, we didn't try and let that stress get near the athletes. But I'll give you an example. I've worked with, yellow jersey holders, white jersey holders, stage winners, tour winners. Everyone wants a piece of them. Everyone wants, to take something away from their recuperation. And everything that hasn't to do with the recuperation is ultimately a problem for an athlete. And when you have, 1,200 journalists trying to get a hold of them, and everyone wants something for themselves, it's very, very difficult to really make sure that you make the athletes as good as they can possibly be. And then it's also it's not just a 9 or now it's 8 riders in the tour. It's also everything that's surrounding them. And you have a lot of experts, you have a lot of people with experience, and everyone has to really work in the same direction. And for me now as a manager, I'm adamant that is the key to being a successful operation. Everyone has to work in the same direction, but everyone also has to be happy with what they do. And I think that's probably what I like about cycling, and hopefully what I would like to introduce where I work now is that you have to really trust each other. You have to work as a family. I don't think corporate life is like that at all. I'm not attracted to corporate life. Corporate life, I don't think you can ultimately really be friends, because you're looking to optimize, and people being comfortable with what they do is probably not always part of it when you work in a corporate environment. I think that's definitely the case for high performance athletes, and I think it's the case in the wine industry. Well, happy people work harder. Happy people are easier to adapt to stressful situations, because they're not trying to protect their own ass. They're actually trying to participate with exactly what they can do. That I've definitely learned in cycling. It must be the same when you're running your crew at Le Bernardin. You have to work in the same directions. Everyone has to just trust each other and know where everyone are, so that they know exactly how things are going to run. I think those operations, in that sense, are very similar as well.
Well, it's a very valid point you bring up. Obviously, working in a restaurant is super stressful, even though we don't want to make this the customer. In cycling, that you want to see drama. That's why I love the Giro better than the Tour de France, because Italians have the talent to bring drama up by default. Absolutely. But in a restaurant, this is the last thing you want to show the client. It's like, you look at the swan. On top of the surface, you see this really calm, but you don't see what's going on under the surface.
Yeah. No, but that's the thing, because there's always something. There are always problems at the tour, and there's always something where you're really balancing on an edge, and if you put one foot wrong, people are going to see you're vulnerable, and they're going to see that there's an ability to really put an attack in on you or find your weaknesses. But on the surface of it, it has to look like a smooth operation. There's a lot of mind games in that as well, I think. But I think that protecting the customer from stress, because they don't go to see you being stressed and your staff being calm. But that's the same thing really with athletes. You really want to make sure that they're able to do their absolute best performance. And I think when you go to a restaurant, the performance is really what's in front of your customer, I guess, on the plate or in the glass. Nothing should stand in the way of them being accessible for them to fully enjoy it. But I think, maybe not in high performance. I have a lot of room for imperfection in my personal life. I ride my bike even if I'm too heavy, and if I'm not fast anymore. If I've ever been, I don't know. I have room for imperfection. I also have room for imperfection in wine, because if imperfection is personality, and if I would rather drink a wine that has personality than one that it's been made in a perfect way, right? Yeah. I would rather hear someone with experience play an instrument than listen to a robot doing it perfectly. So it's not always about perfection, but it's about personality. And I like sport because personality shines through. I like going to a great restaurant because the personality of the chef and the staff is clear, And I think that's also with wine. You have different seasons, you have different issues, you have different kinds of things you tackle. I've never heard a farmer saying that everything was perfect, but I've had amazing wine coming out anyways. So maybe perfection is not the word we're looking for here.
Does perfection even exist?
That's a philosophical question. You know, before I worked in cycling, I did my MA in philosophy, and the philosopher in me would say that it doesn't exist in the world that you and I live in. That's for sure. I'm a pragmatic person. I'm about to be a lot more pragmatic once my kids arrive in California. I can tell you, I'll be so far from perfection in my own private life that could possibly be. But then, being a pragmatic person, it's about doing your best, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. No, but to answer your question, in my team, once we're back open to business, is no, for me, it's key that they have to be happy. It's key that they have different personalities. And the more personalities you have in a team, the better it is, because you can cater to different people.
Exactly.
And nothing is more important than they're happy. I mean, listen, we all have problems, private problems, but that's not necessarily what counts on the stage. On the stage is you have to put the performance in.
Yeah.
But sometimes you have to help, the people a little bit, to maneuver through that. And a smile can, put makeup over so many things.
Yeah. It's the shortest distance between two people.
It's super simple. This is going to be a little difficult with a face mask on, but
yeah, I know.
You said something very interesting in your previous answer. Said you ride still the bicycle if you're not fit or don't feel, or if you're a little too heavy.
I mean, I ride my bike as much as I can. I have a lot of responsibility now, work-wise, and I want to make sure I get, that I get to do as much as I can, and I get to learn as much as I can. But there's definitely that element. But riding my bike really keeps me sane. The more I ride my bike, the better I am, I think, at most things in my life. I think it's a cliche to say that it's therapy to ride your bike, but there's a certain truth to that as well. I feel different about a lot of challenges and problems and issues if I ride my bike. Even if I come back from a bike ride and I haven't felt like I've come to a conclusion, or I haven't had the perfect reflection about what I want to do, I still feel better about almost everything after a bike ride. And there's I can't really, and maybe you shouldn't be able to explain what it does. There's just a mystery of what it does to your mind if you ride your bike, other than just physical fatigue. I think there's something about this, how things look, how things smell, how you, for once, and it's not often that we get to identify with our physical body. We're often trying to distance ourselves from it, for better or for worse. But when you're on your bike, I think you become kind of one with the person you are. We spend so much time, personally and professionally, administrating ourselves. You have to be there at a certain time. You have to get this done within the deadline. You have to meet these criteria, and you have to make that money, and you have to make those payments. Being on the bike is the opposite of that. Being on the bike is being as present as you could possibly be with yourself, in nature, and potentially also with good friends. That's why I love the bike. And I've learned so much about wine on the bike as well, seeing the changing of the seasons. Even now, tonight I'll go for a bike ride. The microclimate that I sense is so fundamental to how different the wine areas are in California. I sense that massively on the bike. Like last weekend, together with our wine consultant who used to be a winemaker, we rode out to Occidental, out towards the coast via the Russian River. Where I work at Stuhlmuller, the Russian River basically goes through the
phenomenal area to ride.
It's phenomenal. It really competes with Tuscany for the best place in the world, I find. And what I learned there, going on a bike ride with him about microclimate, seeing the different soils, seeing these little pockets of climate, of terroir, really. On a 2-hour bike ride, I learned more about the place I am than I would, reading a book about it, I think, because you see it, you sense it, you smell it. And then if you do that bike ride a week later, you'll see things have changed a little bit. Maybe it rained, maybe the sun was, shining a little bit harder. Maybe we're a week later in the growing season, which even now you can tell a difference. So I use it as a professional excuse. It's good for my wine knowledge and my understanding of vineyards and the potential different places if I ride my bike. And it's actually not bullshit. I really do learn.
Yeah. So Majid is asking an interesting question, who's a cyclist actually, a friend of Le Bernardin. Do you think about issues, or listen to music, or just ride and do, not think about anything?
I stopped listening to music a couple of years ago for my own safety. Certain places where I lived in Tuscany, I mean, I would go riding and I would often not meet a car, but if you do meet a car, especially in the tourist season in Tuscany, they drive a little bit differently because they're looking at the things you're looking at, not so much looking at traffic all the time. So I don't listen to music anymore for the health of and for my safety. Strangely enough, there's a thing about not thinking about something and still actually doing a thought process on the bike, which I find at least also philosophically interesting. I get a lot of ideas when I ride my bike. Ideas pop up in my mind, and you're able to reflect about it, I think, in a different way when you're on the bike. You touch upon a subject and you start thinking about it. That's also why actually sometimes I tend to ride the same route on my bike. If I really feel like I need to think something through, if you look at my Strava file, you'll probably see 80% of the rides I do are repetitive. That is actually helpful now for understanding the different, the changing of the season, which is happening sometimes even 2 times a day in the coastal part of California, even where we are. But I think there's a way of thinking about things where you're not specific deductively, analytically on a topic, but you're still understanding. It's probably more seeing things from a different angle because you're separated from the other things that would normally take away your attention. So maybe the question.
2 years ago, I always go every year to, this year it might be undecisive, but I ride typically every year the Stelvio. And 2 years ago, I rode it for the first time, but I did the loop, meaning from Bormio up, on the Swiss side down, and went the other side up again.
Oh wow, that's that's more than 50 kilometers of climbing.
Yeah, and then I was thinking, especially if you become very passionate about cyclists, all of a sudden you have more bicycles. And then you're always preaching sort of, you think of people like Nibali, you think of Pantani, you think of all the great people. And then you're in so much pain coming up the second time. And then you realize these guys actually did the Mortirolo just on top of it.
Exactly.
And did it in half of the time. You huffing and puffing up the last time. Have you ridden obviously with professionals? How is that experience for you?
I would put it this way, in that I've ridden with active pros, and I've also ridden with, I would say, out of shape former pros. The difference between people who've been a pro cyclist and people like me, a pro cyclist can always go fast. Even if they're like 10 years retired, even if they are living as good a life as our friend Joao is, they can always go fast. They can always suffer. They can always, I think they'd rather not suffer, but they can always do something that somehow you realize, even if you maybe have been training for 3 months, they'll still drop you, It's just, I'll tell you a story. Once when I first moved to Italy, how like maybe 2-3 times a year, you sense on the bike that you can't feel the chain. You kind of have the legs of a lifetime. And I had that one day, and I rode up to Björn Ries's house. He was living in Tuscany, not far from where I was. And I was like, hey, Björn, let's go for a ride. And he was like, no, I don't feel like it. He was like basically sitting in his deck chair, drinking white wine actually, and he didn't feel like going on a bike ride. And I pleaded with him to take, to go with a bike ride, because I actually felt that day, young and disrespectful as I was, that I could drop his ass on the climb. It was hubris, because I finally convinced him. He went out. He could tell that I was half wheeling him all the way to the foot of the climb. And, and it was like, it's called Matraia. It's a beautiful climb on actually through vineyards in Lucca. And then I, stupid as I was, I attacked him on the first kilometer.
You should have known better.
Yeah, I know. And he came up to me and he was looking, what are you doing? And I was like, I was 25 years old. I didn't know any better. So I attacked again. Then he came up, rode in front of him, and he rode me so far out of his wheel that he disappeared. And I come up and my lungs are falling out of my face. And he said, I might be fat now and I might be lazy, but I won the tour. Like, what are you trying to do here? And I realized, once you've been at that level, people like me are not gonna like make fun of you. People like me are not gonna drop you at any point at any time. And that's just, a lot of that is genetic. They are just amazing athletes. They've incredible, natural ability to ride your bike, which I'm sad to say I certainly don't have as much as I enjoy it.
Yeah. I put especially a shirt on for you today. The Kaiser.
Legend. Absolute legend. Yeah. I was lucky enough to, I started working in the sport in 2001 when he was still, you know, very much an active part of it. And the one thing about Ulrich, and I think that's, you know, he is probably one of the best examples of a natural talent that there ever was in modern sport. And, you know, the Germans call it the Jahrhunderttalent, you know,
Yeah.
the talent of the century. And an interesting thing that I once, I did a seminar together with the Royal Ballet in Copenhagen about talent development and talent management. And the two conclusions that were, I think, they were the same conclusion that was very similar for ballet and for professional cycling, was that the pure talents, the one that, you know, are genetically perfectly dispositioned and can do everything perfect, which in ballet is fundamental, in the same in cycling. If you have the genes to really be the best possible, you know, specimen of an athlete, they never make it. They'll do good, but they'll never make it. The ones that really build and be who are the perfect champions are the ones that maybe have a little bit less talent than the perfect specimen, but who has the will to go the whole way. And I think that's actually the difference between, and if you take away all the controversy and about doping and everything else, if you look at just isolated at the capacity and the talent in two riders like Ulrich and Armstrong, Ulrich was the more talented one. For me, without a doubt. Probably Lance would agree with that. The difference is just that Lance had such a desire, anger or motivation to go the whole way, and that's why he won. And I think that's such an interesting perspective also, you know, to see like how talent development, it has a lot to do with personality also, and it's not just about physical ability. If it was just physical ability, Ulrich would have won the Tour 5 times in a row. Maybe had to like wine a little bit less, but he could have won the Tour 5.
Actually, when I had our friend Joao on, I brought this topic up as well. And we didn't know each other back then, because I told him I was riding actually in your part of the world with Jan Ulrich. Yeah. And I climbed this Pine Flat Road up with him.
Which is right next to the winery.
I know, but that's why I put the shirt on, because he gave me that anchor point. And he said, it's interesting, Jan Ulrich was always the person, he said exactly the same. He said the only thing with him was always he enjoyed life perhaps a little too much.
Yeah.
And the Tour de France is typically won in January, February, because you try to do diet in the winter, because, you know, within the middle of the season, it's very difficult to lose weight. I mean, it's always difficult to lose weight.
Yeah. I mean, like for some more than others.
Yeah.
But I mean, professional athletes, even in cycling, they have such a small window to really be, you know, the best in their career and to get the results that their, you know, that their talent really, you know, makes it possible for them to get. And I think the cycling, even now, even from when Ulrich was racing against Armstrong, it's changed even more. It's become even more specialized. It's become even more that window of really performing well. You have to get even more things right now. And I would like to think part of this actually because cycling is a lot cleaner. But that window is very, very narrow right now. And you can't, I mean, I remember working with Andy Schleck, and I think I saw him as an immense and incredible talent. But he was also really winging it a lot of years, like really getting everything in place in the last minute. Sometimes it felt like being part of an Indiana Jones movie where, you know, he's fleeing out of like the tomb and he's throwing his head under this rock that falls down and it just barely manages to get out. And sometimes I felt like that with Andy, that like you didn't really know whether he was ready or not, and you would find out. You know, you couldn't program guys like him, other than, you know, he was a massive talent and beautiful bike rider. He just didn't like to be under pressure to perform until he absolutely had to. And when that's only 3 weeks in a row, you can't really, you know, you can't really plan after that always. So that was highly stressful in my years of trying to manage him, for sure.
Yeah. Well, he was obviously one which has one of these amazing Galibier climbs, no?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite moments of ever being at the Tour. It was seeing him do that day, and also everything that went into that from a team perspective was just phenomenal. Like he had this crazy vision of wanting to basically win the Tour in one day, riding all the favorites out of his wheel because he felt like he had the legs that day. And it was really a master plan, using every single person on the team, getting all of that right. And you see that once in a while that is possible, really. I mean, it's probably a little bit the same with winemaking. And sometimes you have a vision, you really want to make the most of that that specific plot or that specific harvest, but everything else has to be in place as well. And I think that you have to be lucky also, you know. It's not, it's cycling is not a computer game, and neither is winemaking. It's not a computer game. You have to be humble, you have to work hard, and you also really have to be lucky. But sometimes you succeed, and luckily for you and me, we get to enjoy cycling either as a spectator or enjoy great wines where everything just came together in the right way. That's I think there will always be a little bit of mystery to that, and it's a mystery that I don't have to understand, right? I like that we're humble about when amazing things are created. There's always an element of mystery to it that I'm happy with that, being left untouched, be it in professional sports or in what makes a wine, beautiful.
Yeah, there's actually an interesting question. Are In the Rain and the climbing specialists from another galaxy?
I mean, if you look at, I would put it this way. If you look at out of even, to ride the Tour de France as a professional bike rider, you have to be phenomenal. You have to be able to do things that very, very few people are able to do, and you have to have so much experience and basically be a top class athlete. But then to be a contender for the top 10, you really have to be out of that very exclusive club. You have to be even better. And then to be able to compete for the podium, you have to be, the tiny percentage of world class that even professional athletes compete to be. But to ride the Tour, you have to be more or less a complete rider. The weaknesses you have to be able to cover in the best possible way. There are a lot of specialists, but the way that the Tour de France routes have been designed, you have to be good at everything, right? You have to climb with the best, you have to time trial, you have to do a top 5 time trial potentially, depending on the parcours, obviously. So the short answer is no. The phenomenons will always be selected to go and ride the Tour, and no one can win the Tour without being a fantastic champion. It's only crowded by phenomenons in the top 10, I would say.
But that would actually take your statement completely apart when you look at the 2018 Giro d'Italia from Chris Froome on the stage 19. He crashed on the recon tour on the first stage.
Yeah,
leaped behind every last time constantly, and then crushed everything on stage 19 and won the Giro.
That's, I think, in my time in cycling, that will go down in history as one of the greatest performances in the Giro, and potentially in modern cycling. It's up there with what Coppi did, when he was at his best. It's strange because a lot of modern cycling is won by very, very short margins and in very, very few kilometers on the last climbs, where someone is just those few seconds better or just a little bit better on the time trial. But that day, he was a game changer. He did something that I'm not sure he'll ever be able to do that again, for not just because he was out with the crash, but that was just like, even when when your competitors really cross the finish line and they go and salute him, the first thing they do, they realize that this is beyond extraordinary. He was writing history. You write history if you win the race, but what he did that day was just absolutely incredible. I'll never forget seeing that. It actually happened shortly after I met my wife, and I was out for lunch with her, and people were texting me, turn on your TV, Froome is winning. And you're like, no, he's not going to win the Giro. He lost all this time, and Simon Yates just dropped him. So like, what are you talking about? And then I came home and watched it, and I realized that I was watching history being written. Like, what he did that day is incredible. I miss those moments. And I was sitting in the month of May and there's no Giro.
You commented very hard on your Twitter feed. You commented very good on that, because on your Instagram, you're very strong wine centric, because you think there's a wine person, clearly. And on Twitter, you obviously can tell there's your strong cycling focus. Actually, David has a great question which segues us into wine. Brian, anyone in pro cycling that is crazy about wine?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. More so probably on the manager side and on the rider side. But I have to say that I've been, a common friend of ours, Fabian Cancellara, who he's Swiss. I always think about Fabian as an Italian. His father is from Basilicata down in the south, and him and I speak German, but him and I always talk Italian, and we spend a lot of time talking about wine. And we've been around in Bulgaria together, and I know he has a passion for the central part of Tuscany as well. He did not only rode on the Strade Bianca and dominated that race for a couple of years in a row. He's definitely also knowledgeable about wine. And I think like I said initially also, that if you like being outside, if you notice what's going on with the changing of the seasons, if you open your eyes when you ride your bike. I mean, a lot of bike riders are fortunate enough to live in parts of Europe where there is wine production. I know I definitely would if I was a professional bike rider. So I also remember actually Luke Durbridge, who was he fantastic athlete who rode for, still rides for Mitchelton Scott. He gifts himself a great bottle of wine every time he wins a bike race, and then he always buys wine that's able to like age really well. And he said he wants to drink it when, you know, when he's retired and when he's like done with his career, and think back on that moment together with that bottle. And I've always encouraged bike riders to invest in wine, to really, you know, use these years to build up a cellar, you know, for everything that you can't drink today as an athlete, you can drink when you're retired. And, you know, the great thing about wine is that it often gets a lot better the more you cellar it. And even if it's not drinking wine, I love looking at the wines in my cellar and thinking about the day I'm going to drink them and wondering what they're like now and what they'll be like in 10 years. And also, you know, obviously the people I'm going to share it with. And I have to, you know, to be honest, I spend a lot of time at bike races collecting wine, you know, traveling through Italy, traveling through France. I haven't always been the most loyal employee, because sometimes I would sneak away and I would spend a fair amount of time chasing up wine. And, you know, I've knocked on the door at Chapoutier because we were in Tain at, you know, at the Hermitage on the Rhone River, and I convinced them to sell me a bottle of L'Hermite. And then and the afternoon after the stage, I walked to the top of that hill of the Hermitage to La Chapelle. And I can tell you a story about the Giro, which is now 10 years old. So Brailsford is probably not going to send me a bill. We have time for that story.
Yeah, please.
I did the full Giro in 2010 with Team Sky, and I was at. It was a very focused team, and it was, you know, they came from the track and they thought they could control everything, and it was a pretty stressful work environment. But at that point I was half Italian. I wanted to have a good lunch, and I stopped in Novara in the middle of nowhere between, I guess, Milano and Torino. And I found this amazing little restaurant. I was the only customer for the lunch service. And it was a great restaurant. And I looked at the wine list and my jaw dropped. They had the most incredible wine list. And I'm a huge fan of Piemonte and the wines of Lange and certain specific producers that really define a lot of things for me in wine. And the wine list was full of that. It was absolutely packed. I obviously couldn't drink more than a couple of glasses. I had to go and work afterwards for the stage. And I talked to the staff, because there was like basically 3 people working the service with only me as a guest, and said, yeah, we have all this wine and no one wants to buy it. And then we've been cellaring it and we don't know what to do about it. And I couldn't help myself. Well, I'll buy it. You know, they said, how much do you want? And I said, look at the car outside. I will take as much as I can fill in that car. So I bought an immense amount of amazing wine. You know, for the wine geeks, I bought cases of 89 Giacosa Red Label, magnums of Cascina Francia Contano. I bought, you know, and 78 vintages, you know, 88, 90, 89, incredible wine. But this was the month of May, and it was a super stressful thing because I had to drive to the finish line of the stage in the Giro, and my car was packed with wine. Luckily, it wasn't a warm day. I parked in the shade at the press center. We didn't really do anything on the stage, so I didn't have to, go to the podium with any of the riders. And then at night, I parked the car below the hotel. Luckily, they had a subterranean parking. And then when the dinner was done and everyone was going to bed, I drove 3.5 hours to my house in Tuscany to put the wine in my cellar. And I drove the 3.5 hours back. I didn't get any sleep that night. I was so concerned that the wine would, suffer from, I couldn't drive around it for another 2 weeks in Italy. And every time I had a bottle of that, I think back of those and on those moments, I've been sitting at, faraway places in Burgundy, and I bought, 1990 Latache bottles that you shouldn't even be able to find anymore. And those bottles are just, when you have a passion, it's hard really to hold back. So I've always been chasing wine, and that's the reason why I have a cellar. It's probably because I've been chasing wine whenever I was at a bike race.
Mm-hmm. So we need to drink something, no?
Absolutely.
Cheers to everyone.
Cheers, Aldo, and thank you for these beautiful glasses.
Oh, thank you for the wines. Today we drink the same wines, obviously. Can you tell us something about how did you, obviously with so much cycling background, did you make it to Stuhlmuller? Which the accent in our case works for our advantage for once.
Thank you. It was coincidence, and it, as always with me, it started at a bike race. I was at a race in San Francisco, and then I randomly met some really nice people who we started to talk, and they were having a cocktail party at night, cocktail party with wine, and they invited me to their house, and I went there. They were really good friends with the Stuhlmullers, so I started to come out to California to visit my friends, and I eventually ended up at the Stuhlmuller Ranch out in Alexander Valley, and I became really good friends with the family. And we joked about me coming out to work here for many years. I still felt like I had stuff to do in cycling, and I was probably also doubting whether I, what can I really participate with here? But then it became more and more concrete and more specific. I started to come out here quite often. I started, in the years in between, learning more about wine and getting as much knowledge as I possibly could. And then actually when, last year I became a father to two twin girls, and I think the traveling part of my life is definitely over for a certain period or changing. And I wanted to really to focus on being in one place and working with something that I was at least as passionate about. So when they offered the job again to me to be the general manager of the winery, I was like, I'm going to do it now. I'm going to chase this dream, and I'm going to make the most of it to pay back the trust that the Stuhlmuller family has shown in me, and to move to a place that I love so much. And I love the diversity of the wines in California. I love the climate here. And it's a learning experience for sure. Probably also for the people who work for me now, but I'm going to give it everything to really do my best.
Why is that?
I'm a really impatient person, which is sometimes hard to come to terms with. But I do want to really introduce some of the principles of what I think it makes a successful team and what makes a successful working environment. Having a happy group of staff working together towards one goal. Honoring the tradition of how things are done. This is a Stuhlmuller family have been growing grapes in Alexander Valley for 40 years. They've been making wine on their own name for 20. And I think the continuity, together with developing other projects, together with actually connecting it a lot with cycling, I would love to show people who are passionate about cycling and wine at the same time, people such as yourself, to come out and see this area. And if you don't have to ride the Tour of Flanders 2 weeks later, there's no reason why you couldn't enjoy a glass of wine. And I really think in this part of California, including our winery, there's a diversity here. We do a lot of different white wines. We have, even on our property, different climates. The Russian River goes right through it, so we're able to do different styles of wine depending on the soil, if it's benchland or if it's hillside. And I really want to bring people closer to the love I have for this area and for the winemaking here. And I think sharing that passion and obviously also in this difficult time, building the business, are two things that are very close to my heart. So I just want to pay back the trust that they have in hiring someone that's definitely a wine geek and a cycling geek, but I think I have a good work engine and an outsider's perspective is sometimes good, I think. So that's what I want to participate with.
Yeah, because an outsider's perspective asks questions which no one would ask.
Oh, I've been asking a million questions. No, but it's also, I'm not.
Are you at the point where they're turning away? He's coming now.
Yeah, I'm not a winemaker. I'm very passionate about wine. I don't have an MBA in business development, but I know how to work towards being successful, with one goal. And I see myself as a customer often. I'm the receiving end of, obviously not. We do 12,000 cases of wine. I can't drink all of it myself. But I often take as you probably do as well in your line of work, I take the consumer's point of view. How is this going to be perceived? Is this what we want, how we want to present ourselves? Are we giving people good enough access to get to know who we are? How do we identify ourselves towards, basically our winery is in between Silver Oak, the Sonoma part of Silver Oak, and Jordan. And those are two places that a lot of wine drinking people, at least in America, know about. But we're a small family-owned winery in the middle of those two. So how do we get people to understand the style that we are working towards and the approach that we have? I mean, we're at the end of a beautiful road. It's like one of the nicest places to ride my bike. So how do we make people understand and appreciate also where we are, in California, but also the history of the Stuhlmuller family at the ranch, really.
I've noticed this. I organized with a couple of neighbors, and one of them actually is watching. He created an interesting training handle for our Dolomite trip. Train with champagne. Exactly. We all. His name is Mary. He's right on here. He had to concede that it's not working. Train for champagne is working. Train with champagne, not so much.
I guess, yeah. I mean, it's a nice thirst quencher, but you can't have that much of it.
But he follows very strong the Jacques Anquetil method, even though his wife said that's not true.
I think there's a certain part of truth to it. I mean, I definitely, I mean, wine. I think wine, in a certain degree, is a healthy part of your life. I think it helps you sit down, relax, you know, reflect a little bit, be in good company. I think being in good company is very healthy for us, and I'm missing that a lot at the moment. I think wine.
We all do.
Yeah, and I think wine brings a lot of other nice elements into your life. Drinking with moderation, I'm convinced, is healthy. And so, I mean, I know athletes, good athletes, that can easily drink a couple of glasses of wine a night and be just as successful at a big race. Yeah, train with champagne, that's probably taking it to another level. Yeah.
So, but interesting was, I did one thing on our rest day, and he actually was convinced that a rest day is, we don't need a rest day, even though after a week of cycling, you know, Stelvio, Monterolo, Gavia, all these passes.
Wow.
And then said, okay, on the rest day, I bent in and said, we do only a 20-mile ride. But we started on one winery. We came there in cycling clothes. But I made everyone spit wine because cycling and riding is not really recommended. But we started in Cantina Tarlan and then cycled to the Alto Adige area down.
I love that. It's funny because, sorry for interrupting, I was commentating on the Tour of the Alps for Danish TV the last couple of years, which it used to be called Giro del Trentino. And I was only talking about wine, and you know, there was a lot of, we were only commentating on the last 50 kilometers, and there was so much going on in the race. But then on the last stage, they rode past Talan. You know that, you know, it's a cooperative, isn't it?
Yeah, but good.
I'm such a fan of their wine. I'm such a fan of the price point of every single product they do, and I go to certain restaurants in Tuscany on the coast where I know that they have their wines because they're so great with food. And then when the peloton passed the Cantina Talan, I was like, I just started talking about it for like nonstop for 5 minutes, and they were like, it was close to the finish line. It didn't really go down well with my colleagues. So yeah, I mean, that whole area for riding is incredible. That first part of, I mean, those climbs are hard, I'm sure. I mean, but it's really a good place to go where you can ride.
It wasn't that bad. We started there and then we drove up to Lago di Caldaro, which was just a short climb, and then we all descended down to Tramin and had lunch with another friend of ours, Martin Hofstetter from Foradori.
Fantastic.
A great Pinot Noir producer and also Gewürztraminer producer. So, and finished their lunch, and everybody said this was the day.
But then I think, you know, that's exactly what I want to do here in California, because you definitely jump from winery to winery, and I think the variety of riding that you can have here, even, you know, if you're starting in Alexander Valley where we are, you can go, you know, you can do Pine Flat, you can go, you know, through Alexander Valley, Russian River, Dry Creek Valley, you can go out towards the coast. And for me, you know, especially because I go slow, it's one of the best ways to learn about the various, you know, sections of the wine producing regions, because you can tell the difference so much when you're riding your bike, because you notice so many more things than if you're riding your car. And wine, and at least when you're done riding, wine just tastes so good, doesn't it?
Everything. The food tastes great and the wine tastes delicious.
Yeah.
So, but this is such a good statement, because I showed my girlfriend, we drove in the Catskills. There's one road which I absolutely love on the bicycle, because it's windy, it's curvy, it goes up and down, and it's very quick. And I showed her this with the car, and I drove around and said, this doesn't do anything to me in the car. I was completely shocked, but in the bicycle, it's just stunning.
Yeah, I think it's also because you really use your senses in a different way. You're orientated. Exactly. I've also, you know, I did ride my bike somewhat in Denmark, but it wasn't really until I moved to Italy that I picked it up properly. And I think you get an appreciation for the changing of the seasons. which is something, you know, in winemaking is so different. You know, now even, you know, if I look back 2 weeks ago in our vineyards, how different they look now. You know, it's been raining for the most part of this week, and how it, even how it smells today when it's the first day of sun really here in Sonoma for a couple of days. Everything just looks and smells differently, and that appreciation, that understanding of the subtleties of nature and those little things, the bike really gave me that. And I think from a, you know, from a wine appreciation point of view, or trying to understand what winemaking is about, those little nuances and those small differences are really part of what makes wine interesting for me. It's such a clear, it's not a mirror, but it's a reflection on interpretation of everything that's going on, right? And you know, decision making, working hard, being humble, being lucky. But then other than that, it's definitely a reflection of what's going on, you know, in nature, and, you know, climate wise, and in, you know, the soil conditions, all of that. I just think it's really a beautiful thing.
Yeah, you don't dictate anything on nature. Nature dictates it to you.
Yeah.
And you work with it as a result.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Can you tell me a little bit about the red wine?
Yeah, it's funny because we wanted to find something different for you to taste. You know, we obviously also have a library of older wine, and we have, you know, obviously a fair amount of stock of older vintages to really understand the continuity of the winemaking. So we wanted to open a bottle with you that was from a great vintage. You know, every year is different, but with 2012 was a fantastic vintage here, and it's one of our best blocks. It's from a block 8, and it's kind of like one of those, you know, often we do a reserve Cabernet and we do a vineyard specific wine, and this one is what I believe is really a great vintage and what drinks really well right now. I was so curious. I had to open it last night. I was also nervous sitting in front of one of the greatest wine experts in the world, and I wanted to make sure that everything was good, at least with the bottle. So yeah, I think it. You know, when I'm out at the office at the winery, I'm looking out in the Maicama Mountains. Mount St. Helena is right in front of the view from my office.
I saw your Instagram this morning.
Yeah, I can't really complain about the view from my office, and that sort of marks the line between Sonoma and Napa. And I really like wines to have a sense of place, that you can actually taste where they're from, other than everything else that's going on in the winemaking process. And, you know, Napa is so famous for big, you know, quiet sort of bolsterous wines, and I love Napa wine, don't get me wrong, but I like when Sonoma wines with the same grape varietals give a sense of place of what Sonoma is, you know. And Sonoma has very different traditions for winemaking, has a very different history as a wine region than Napa. And I thought this was an interesting way to show our sort of interpretation of a relatively classic, even if there is some American oak and combined with French oak in this one, like a classic statement of what Alexander Valley can actually do when everything works well with Cabernet. And you know, in all humbleness, I think when we do that well, we can compete with some of the best wines in Napa.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I know Instagram is gonna cut us off very soon. Yeah, because at the time you can only do a certain amount of time. I obviously could talk to you for hours, and we should definitely do a wine cycling trip together.
Absolutely. I don't think people won't have difficulties finding clients for that one.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aldo.
Enjoy your weekend. Bye.
You too. Bye.
Cheers to you.
Yes.